Okay, so let's dive into the content for today. We're starting in on this book, and now you might think, oh, we only have two and a half ish, two to three classes on this book. But if you also look at the book, it's really short, and it's a pretty easy read, relatively, I guess. And it's also so now we might not cover all of it, and that's okay. I'm just gonna cover a decent amount of the book for you guys, hopefully to get some of the main moves, argumentative moves, and so you guys learn something. So the authors of this book are Alvin Plantinga and Daniel Dennett. Plantinga is probably the most influential philosopher of religion. In this probably maybe the last century actually. Um, and Daniel Dennett is one of the most influential philosophers of biology and philosophers of mind. I would put him more in philosophy of mind camp. And both of them throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s were super influential in their fields. So they're both very good. Uh, and now I think most of their most influential work was earlier in life. But even still, the stuff they have to say now is going to be good. If you look at their pictures, if you Google them, Daniel Dennett kind of looks like Santa Claus, and Alvin Plantinga kind of looks like Abraham Lincoln. So this book is based off an event where the two of them, Plantinga known for defending belief in God, and Dennett known for defending atheism, they said it kind of looked like Abraham Lincoln and Santa Claus facing off. Um, anyway, I thought that was funny. But yeah, so this book was based on an event at an APA, at a American Philosophical Association meeting where they had a discussion. Plantinga was the main speaker and Dennett was the commentator. So strictly speaking, it wasn't a debate. And they went back. They went at it back and forth, and it eventually was turned into this book. I had the opportunity to be at this meeting, so it was really fun. Like the room was packed, like the room was abuzz with excitement for this meeting. Okay, so that's some background on the book, and we're starting with chapter one on Plantinga. Now, we're going to go through the book, but I'm not going to try to cover all the main parts. For this first chapter, I do plan to cover most of it, and we're not going to get to the end. But yeah, so just try to read the best you can, and also don't expect that we'll be covering every part because there's too much. And sometimes the two of them go on tangents, and I don't want to chase those tangents down. I want us to go over the main points. All right, so with that, let's look into the handout. Okay, and the main question Plantinga is after is this question, which is whether contemporary evolutionary theory is compatible with theistic belief. I'm looking at the top of the handout. Now, why is this topic important? Why should you care about this? Um, well, a lot of people, when you ask them about religion, uh, a lot of what they say is, well, I don't believe in religion. I believe in science, right? That's kind of what they say. Or some religious people end up being distrusting of science because of their religion. It might conflict with their beliefs about God. So it's a really valuable topic to consider. Well, does religion and science, do they actually conflict? Plantinga is going to say no. Now, there's a lot of issues in science, and things like cosmology, questions about quantum physics, questions about um, what was I going to say? Oh, and evolution, and that's actually what the topic is going to be. So Plantinga says, since we want to focus our topic, and also it's what Dennett knows a lot about, we'll see whether theistic religion conflicts with evolution. Now, here's what Plantinga says at the beginning, and you can just follow along in the handout. This is the first time I've ever taught from this book, so I made the handout reasonably filled out so that I've actually written out most of the parts. There's not a whole lot that you need to fill in, so just follow along in the handout and make sure you're understanding and absorbing information. So Plantinga says he's going to focus on Christian belief, but he also notes almost everything he says will be relevant to Islamic and Judaistic theistic belief. So basically any monotheism. Okay, so the question then is, in general, is monotheism in conflict with evolutionary theory? Now, here's the part of theism, okay, just follow along in the handout, that might cause trouble for evolution, or evolution might cause trouble for theism. It's this on page 4. It's the view that God has created human beings in his image. God intended to create creatures of a certain kind and planned that there be creatures of that kind, rational creatures with a moral sense and the capacity to know and love him, love God, and then acted in such a way, God acted in such a way as to accomplish this intention. So that's a part of theistic belief that almost all monotheistic religions would hold. Okay, so that's theism. Now, what's evolution? Okay, evolution is accepted by a lot of scientists right now. Almost every biologist is going to hold to evolution. But when you think about it, if somebody were to say, "Well, define evolution for me," a lot of people would have a hard time. Like, I bet a lot of you would have a hard time if I were saying, "What do you mean by evolution?" So this is where it's valuable, especially as philosophers, to try to get clear on what we mean by these terms. Here's what planning means. Evolution is going to be comprised of the conjunction of 3 theses. It'll be comprised of 3 theses. The first is an ancient Earth thesis. Okay, that's that the Earth has been around for billions of years. It's not like some people who think the Earth was created, in the last 10,000 years or so. So that's the ancient Earth thesis, that the Earth is very old. B, the thesis of descent with modification. The enormous diversity of the contemporary living world has come about by way of offspring, differing, ordinary and subtle and small ways from their parents. Okay, so how do you get all this diverse life we see around us? All these creatures, elephants, monkeys, bugs. It's from parents having kids or offspring, and those offspring differing a little bit, and then those offspring having further kids, and those offspring differing a little bit. Descent with modification. Finally, C, the common ancestry thesis, that there is a tree of evolutionary descent linking all organisms by ties of genealogy. So all organisms eventually go back to very simple single-celled organisms. Okay, now that's what's meant by evolution. And lastly, Planning distinguishes another thesis that he calls Darwinism, and that's D. The principal mechanism driving this process of descent with modification, what we call Proposition B, is natural selection winnowing random genetic mutation. So how does that go? So thesis of descent with modification just says, look, the kids are a little bit different, their kids are going to be a little bit different, and so on. Okay, but what we need for Darwinism is to explain the mechanism behind this. And what's that mechanism? You're going to have random genetic mutation. Okay, so there has to be some sort of mutation. Something that wasn't originally in the genes, okay, but some sort of mutation, normally caused by, people think, some sort of radiation or some sort of deformity, I guess. But it turns out that it's adaptive. So, here's a silly version of it, but it might be that some creature is born and it can actually flap a little bit and can kind of hover along a little bit. Well, creatures like that, if due to mutation, it can fly, flutter around a little bit. I'm just making something up. I'm just giving an example. That creature might be able to survive better and give off its genetic information to its offspring, so that those offspring can fly a little better. The other ones that can't fly, they're eventually going to die out, and the ones that can fly, they're the ones that are going to reproduce and pass on those genes. A lot of you have heard this story, so a lot of this is review. So Darwinism gives you this specific mechanism, random mutation plus natural selection, which is the creatures that don't have those valuable new genetic materials from the genetic mutation, those will die off. Okay, so that's the gist. You don't have to be an experienced biologist to know these basics, and it's something that everybody should know. Now, the question is, does what we just said, evolution plus Darwinism, conflict with a belief in God? That'll be the next video.